I have a few issues to raise, so I'll just go through them. I come from a rural area, so local link services are very important. I'm just wondering, just in my own county, but in general as well, in Cavan, is it intended to roll them out? Some areas are very well served and others are not. There's no service practically at all. And when I question this with local link, they say it's a lack of funding issue. So, and it just relates to what Deputy Maureen O'Connor brought up about the lack of connectivity as well with other bus routes. We don't unfortunately have a train in Cavan, coming into Cavan. The lack of foresight by previous governments back in the 50s and 60s saw to that anyway. But so I don't know if there's any hope of even asking for a train back into Cavan, but anyway, I can hope and ask for it. But even to have good connectivity between the local link and the national, the inter city or main expressway routes as well. There's a thing referred to there as DMORS, which is what the design manual for urban roads and streets. Now, that was something that existed since 2013, so it obviously existed at COVID time, but it must have been totally forgotten at COVID time. And we saw where outdoor dining was facilitated. It led to disabled parking bays being moved without any consultation with disabled people or DPOs. Some of those disabled parking bays have not been put back to where they were, and they're purposely placed near to services and shops and so on. And they ended up being pushed further out, which is an inconvenience to say the least for disabled people. We see where streets have the outdoor dining, they have signs outside of shops on the footpath, they have rubbish left out. All of these things cause problems for disabled people, for wheelchair users, people with mobility issues, and people with visual impairment as well. And if something could be done to improve the streetscape. There's another thing, accessible pole stops. I think the NTA, there was an intention to have a yellow pole with a flag on it so that there were more visual for, again, people with visual impairment or people with intellectual disabilities, and that doesn't seem to happen, so maybe you could give it just an update on that. I just want, is there a minimum number of parking bays? Does that come under yours for disabled parking bays in a particular area? Maybe that's not under your remit, but there just seems to be a lack. When we have 22% of our population identifying it with a disability, not all of them may need a disabled parking bay, but certainly a percentage of them will. And a point that's been brought up by witnesses here is that there's the rollout of new buses which are accessible, and that's very welcome. But some of them are still not suitable for the larger motorised wheelchairs. And then if there is place for, it's only place maybe for one or two at the most. And there is a lack of awareness among some of the drivers as well, where people go to board. Sometimes they're left at the side of the road. They go to board. We've had reports of drivers being extremely rude, refusing to ask someone to move a buggy out of a disabled or a wheelchair space, and being rude about it as well, which is not required. And there's another issue on, I know Deputy Moran O'Connor was talking about disabled taxis. Disabled people tell me they ring a taxi and they frequently do not turn up. They just don't want the hassle of having to bother with a wheelchair user when they can, just easily bring somebody else, which is very disappointing as well, because not everybody with a disability can use a bus or a train. It depends on the level of and the complexity of the disability, and they may need to have a taxi to bring them from place to place, such as work or education or whatever it is. So, okay, I'll just...
Just on Local Link and Connecting Ireland generally, you're right, there is government earlier this year approved the business case for Connecting Ireland, which was kind of launched toward the end of last year, and services continue into this year. So there has been a massive expansion in terms of Local Link services across the country, which has been supported by increased funding, and the likes of which has probably never gone into rural public transport. So there are lots of services being rolled out across the country, effectively one a week this year. And Anne and Hugh might be able to provide some detail around specifically Cavan. And on DMORS, the other issue I'd pick up on, I note your comments just around some of the rollout of the temporary infrastructure as part of the COVID-19 response. There was a DMORS interim advice note brought out at that time, which kind of supplemented the core DMORS guidance. It did call for consideration particularly of the impact of some of those temporary measures. As we move into now, that's been updated really, or superseded with the Sustainable Mobility Policy, which has a high-level goal, Goal 6, which is take a whole of journey journey approach to mobility, promoting inclusive access for all, and issues such as those about decluttering footpaths, etc., are specifically referenced in the new policy framework, and that will feed its way through into the likes of DEMA advice notes into the future as well. So I might ask NTA colleagues, and just in terms of some of the specifics.
So just on Local Link, and particularly in your area, so as Gareth said, we've published the Connecting Ireland plan. It's a 5-year plan in terms of delivery of additional services. We can't go everywhere all at once. Unfortunately, there is a programme. We improved or provided 38 new services, new and improved services last year. We're hoping to provide up to 70 this year, and that'll keep going as we get to the end of the programme. So we do publish every year our programme for the year, which lists all the services that we're going to do, and then we publish quarterly bulletins on how we're doing in terms of delivery. So we can certainly give you the information associated with your own county about where we are. We're still planning, obviously, for what will be done next year, and again, that will be subject to funding, but we do try and ensure that we spread the improvements across the country rather than focusing on one particular area. But I do know, and I am aware, that improvements have been made in Cavan, and we do try, particularly with the services, the Local Link services and the Cavan Town services, as well as our other Local Link services, that we get them to integrate and interchange at Cavan bus station, as much as we possibly can. So yes, that's part of the rollout. Hugh will just talk to you about the yellow poles and flags, but I suppose the challenge around wheelchair spaces and buggies in wheelchair spaces is a very challenging issue for all our operators, particularly on busy services. And most people will, if they see a wheelchair, will move if they have a buggy in the wheelchair space. We did launch a video a number of years ago, and we've just refreshed that to try and encourage people to realise that the wheelchair space is for wheelchair users primarily. We do now provide a buggy space on a large number of a separate wheelchair buggy space on many of our services, not on all of them. So there's room for both, and I think we just want all our customers to recognise that a wheelchair space should first of all be for the wheelchair user, and that they get priority in that space. And so it's doing a little bit of, we're proposing another campaign around that to try and encourage that people do ensure that priority is kept for the wheelchair user. On the taxi and the wheelchair accessible taxis, so we do publish a list on our website about what wheelchair accessible services are available, and also this part of the conditions of the grant associated with getting a grant related to providing a wheelchair accessible taxi or hackney is to be available, and they have to produce records for us that they make themselves available at particular times to ensure that they are available for those that need them. Which we would monitor. So if there's any particular area that you want us to have a look at, we'll certainly we'll do that.
On the bus poles, we started a programme a few years ago to replace bus poles because we saw around the country that a lot of bus poles were in a very corroded condition, no information at them, and a lot of places no poles even. And while there were yellow poles across Dublin, there was red poles in most other locations and grey poles and all of that. So we came up with a standardised pole design. We did consult with various groups. On foot of feedback, we made big changes to it. We put in what's called a carousel. The information panel in the middle was always black plastic. We went and changed it to yellow plastic. The sign that's at the top of the pole, which is a very large sign, we call it a flag, that was planned to be blue. We changed that to yellow and green, mainly yellow. So now I think there's more yellow in a very visible way on those poles than would have been the case originally, and a lot more information, and we are beginning to roll that out across the country. And on the motorised wheelchairs on buses then, we're aware that motorised wheelchairs, a lot of them can be much larger than a standard wheelchair, and in designing the buses, we're conscious of that. There's only so much you can squeeze into the space, including how to get access from the door into the area. So there's a standard European standard that we follow, and we try and go well above that. And in some of the fleet we have, we are significantly above it, and others we are above it, but not as much. And we've been willing in places to go back, and I recall in Waterford when we introduced the buses there, While the wheelchair space was big enough, the gangway to get there was hard to manoeuvre, and a particular person with a motorised wheelchair wasn't able to make it. We got modifications made to the door, the driver's cabin, one or two other places, the stanchion, to create more space. So if there's things like that we can do, we're not averse to doing it. But it's impossible for us to cater for the largest of those vehicles. Pardon?
The weight on the ramp.
Yeah, that's true. Some of them actually our ramps have weight limits as well, and there are issues there as well. So we try and accommodate as much as we can. We're well above the standard required, and where the layout of the vehicle allows us to be more generous to that standard, we always are.